Isabella Harris sat in the velvet embrace of disappointment at the far corner of the quaint little cafe, a place nestled within a snow-dusted park that offered a fleeting, almost theatrical, escape from the city's relentless pace. The air was a warm, heavy mixture of cinnamon and roasted beans, a scent that usually promised comfort but now felt, ironically cloying against the familiar dull ache of disappointment pressing against her ribs. Her long blonde hair was tied back in a neat, professional knot, yet a few rebellious strands brushed her cheek, a small sign of the underlying tension she meticulously contained. The muted glow of late afternoon light filtered through the frosted windows, not sharp and revealing, but soft, casting velvety shadows on the wooden floor, perfectly complementing the elegant simplicity of her tailored, minimalist coat. She checked her watch again, a practiced gesture, less about impatience and more about the innate rhythm of a woman who schedules her solitude. This was her fourth blind date in a sterile procession of 3 months, each one a carbon copy of the last. She found herself weary of the endless, transactional conversations, people listing job titles, numerical achievements, curated dream vacations, always chasing something shiny and external, rarely asking, "How do you feel?" Her best friend, the persistent voice of hopeful reason, had offered the final pleading push. "Come on, Issa, just one more. Maybe your heart just needs the right moment, not the right resume." And so, she had obeyed. An act of faith in her friend's judgment over her own jaded intuition, here in this overly picturesque cafe. Bracing herself for the inevitable non-connection with a stranger she already suspected would be indistinguishable from all the others. The chime of the doorbell cut through the low murmur of the cafe's patrons, a small hopeful punctuation mark that died almost instantly. Jason Miller entered, a figure of solid, unpretentious physicality, tall and broad-shouldered, shaking a light coat of snow from a heavy jacket that looked more functional than fashionable. His attire was a striking contrast to the cafe's polished setting and Isabella's tailored style: jeans, work boots, and a forest green flannel shirt, all worn with the quiet ease of a man comfortable in his own skin, a genuine and rare quality, yet one that emphasized the gulf she instinctively felt lay between them. He scanned the room, his eyes crinkling slightly as they landed on her, and he offered a small, unhurried nod before covering the distance to her table. "Isabella?" he asked, his voice low and carrying a hint of roughness, a natural resonance that she involuntarily noted. She stood to offer a measured, warm smile, a perfectly calibrated social gesture. "Yes, Jason, right." They settled back into their seats, the initial pleasantries as stiff and predictable as old lace. Jason confessed almost immediately that he was not good at small talk, a refreshing dose of honesty that she truly appreciated, though it did little to make their subsequent conversation less like two puzzle pieces that did not quite fit. He revealed his profession, a carpenter, specializing in custom furniture and local shop orders. Isabella offered a polite, somewhat detached nod, acknowledging the rarity of such a tactile profession in an increasingly digital world. "That's rare these days. Working with your hands, I mean." A faint, genuine smile touched his lips as he responded. "Keeps me grounded." A statement that was both simple and deeply resonant, revealing a philosophy of life that was both foreign and intriguing to her. She in turn described her world: fashion design, luxury pieces, demanding clients, the constant, dizzying cycle of travel and trend. He listened, truly listened, asking several thoughtful questions that showed genuine engagement, not just waiting for his turn to speak. Yet with every answer she gave, she could feel the gap between their worlds subtly widening. Still, he possessed an undeniable kindness. He spoke with a gentle care, making no transparent attempt to impress. A fundamental decency that, by itself, was a significant departure from her usual dating experiences. But as the minutes stretched into a quiet, conversational lull, a familiar sensation crept over Isabella, not boredom, but a gentle, resigned withdrawal. The hoped-for flicker of connection she had foolishly, perhaps, prayed for simply was not igniting. Her heart, so often guarded by layers of professional poise and self-reliance, remained unmoved. She was already forming the gentle, polite sentence to excuse herself when the cafe door burst open with a jolt of raw, youthful energy. A little girl, no older than 4, a vivid splash of pink against the snow-dusted background, bounded in, her cheeks flushed and pink, her curly blonde hair bouncing with every step, her wide eyes scanning the room with focused determination. She was bundled in a puffy coat, beneath which peeked a pink dress embroidered with tiny stars. "Daddy!" she shouted, a joyful explosion of sound, launching herself straight toward their table and directly into Jason's startled embrace. "That's her, the lady from your favorite story." Jason froze, his arms reflexively catching the child, his face a sudden mask of utter mortification. Isabella turned, the abruptness of the interruption jarring her carefully maintained composure. The little girl, completely oblivious to the sudden tension, looked up at Isabella with a delighted, undeniable grin. "You said her hair looks like sunshine," Anna declared with triumphant certainty. "I knew it had to be her." Jason, already apologizing with his eyes, cleared his throat, a low, nervous sound. "Anna, honey," he began, His voice a strained whisper, but the girl, determined, was already fumbling with a folded, rumpled piece of paper she retrieved from her coat pocket, her tiny fingers working to present her treasure. She placed the drawing, a child's vibrant, unmistakable creation, on the table directly in front of Isabella. It depicted three crude but cheerful stick figures, a simple house, and a colossal, dominant sun with bright yellow rays. One of the stick figures, centrally placed, was adorned with a shock of bright yellow hair and a pink dress. "That's you," Anna declared proudly, pointing her small finger at the drawing. "You're the lady from the story Daddy tells me before bed." Isabella stared, utterly speechless, her vision momentarily blurring as the world, which had seemed so clearly divided between their respective spheres, suddenly, dramatically, dissolved. Jason's voice, thick with apology and embarrassment, finally cut through the silence. "I might have made up a bedtime story, just something silly to help her sleep." Isabella simply blinked, her chest tightening as her heart, which had been so efficiently guarded against the usual superficiality of life, stirred with a sudden, overwhelming warmth, a feeling that was profound, confusing, and completely genuine. Her mind raced, grasping for context that simply wasn't there. What story? Who was this lady of sunshine and pink dresses? 1,000 questions swam behind her eyes, the professional reserve giving way to a nascent, vulnerable curiosity. The silence that stretched between the three of them was no longer awkward, but heavy with potential, charged with the revelation that Jason had not been merely on a date. He had been sitting opposite a figure from his own personal mythology, a character he had apparently woven into his daughter's consciousness, a secret, gentle hope revealed by a 4-year-old in a burst of pink and sunshine. Isabella picked up the drawing, her fingers tracing the crayon lines, suddenly seeing not a clumsy stick figure, but the silent, profound depth of a man who makes up bedtime stories about the woman he is hoping to meet, a man who had seen her not in a headshot or a profile, but as a mythical figure of light. The sheer, tender vulnerability of the act shattered all her preconceptions about his work boots and flannel shirt, revealing a quiet, soulful interior she had been too quick to dismiss. She looked up at Jason, whose own eyes were wide with a mix of fear and relief, and for the very first time that afternoon, the distance between them evaporated, replaced by a sudden, unexpected, and overwhelming connection that felt real, authentic, and truly meaningful. It was in that exact, chaotic, heartwarming moment that Isabella realized she had been searching for a resume, while her heart had been waiting for a fairy tale. The air in the quaint little cafe, thick with the scent of cinnamon and roasted beans, suddenly crackled with a new, unexpected energy as the remainder of Isabella's meticulously constructed, emotional defenses collapsed under the weight of a child's sincerity, transforming the blind date she had been actively resigning herself to abandon into something far more magical and profound than her guarded imagination had ever dared to conceive. Isabella remained perfectly still, the child's drawing clutched in her hands, its crayon-drawn sun and stick figures a powerful, undeniable testament to an unseen emotional depth in the man sitting opposite her. Anna, the small, radiant catalyst for this seismic shift, had her fingers wrapped tightly around her father's flannel sleeve, her face a portrait of unadulterated childish glee, beaming at Isabella as if a long-awaited figure from her own personal mythology had just materialized before her very eyes, a sight that simultaneously mortified and helplessly amused Jason. "Sorry about that," he murmured, his deep voice now softened by a layer of palpable embarrassment, yet tinged with a quiet pride in his daughter's dramatic entrance. "She has a very vivid imagination." But Isabella wasn't annoyed. The familiar chill of disappointment had been chased away, replaced by an unfamiliar, surprising warmth spreading through her chest, a sensation akin to thawing after a long self-imposed winter. "Do you always tell her stories like that?" she asked, a genuine, gentle smile curving her lips toward Anna. Jason, self-conscious, scratched the back of his neck, his shoulders hunching slightly. "Just one," he admitted, his gaze drifting over the worn wood of the table. "A bedtime story I made up when she was scared of sleeping alone after ... It's about a woman with sunshine hair who comes into a little house that feels too cold and makes everything warm again." He paused, glancing at Anna, who nodded with profound, childish solemnity, verifying the absolute truth of the tale. "It helped her feel safe," he added, the simple statement hanging in the air. Isabella's smile faltered, replaced by a thoughtful contemplation. Safe concept, she realized, with a sudden, startling clarity she hadn't truly felt in years, having always prioritized control and achievement over genuine emotional security. Her eyes drifted back to Jason, the trace of sawdust still clinging to the cuff of his flannel shirt, the worn, honest roughness of his hands from labor, yet the touch resting on Anna's back was careful, protective, and infinitely gentle. He lacked the superficial gloss of the men who usually populated her social sphere. No conspicuous Rolex, no showy European car, but there was an undeniable, quietly strong difference to him. And Anna, entirely captivated, was still staring at Isabella with the unwavering belief only a child can muster, as if she were a literal embodiment of magic. A decision, uncharacteristic in its spontaneity, formed in Isabella's mind. "I guess I can stay a little longer," she said, her voice soft but firm, folding the precious drawing and placing it gently beside her teacup. Anna clapped her hands together with unrestrained delight, and a visible wave of relief washed over Jason's features. They departed the cozy sanctuary of the cafe not long after, stepping out into the late afternoon air. As the last vestiges of daylight surrendered to the soft, enveloping twilight, Anna skipped ahead, an animated blur of pink against the snow, happily humming a buoyant Disney tune. "I hope this wasn't too strange," Jason apologized again, walking beside Isabella, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers. "I told her this was just a coffee with someone I didn't know, but she's persistent. And once she gets an idea," Isabella genuinely chuckled, the sound light and musical. "She's adorable, and honestly, persistent is a compliment in my world." He returned the smile, a hint of melancholy entering his eyes. "She gets that from her mom." A thoughtful silence descended, but now it was a comfortable one, devoid of the previous tension. "What happened to her mom?" Isabella asked gently, finally acknowledging the silent, 3-year-old elephant in the room. Jason took a slow, measured breath, the weight of the memory briefly settling upon him. "She passed away when Anna was 2. Leukemia. It happened fast. One minute we were a family of 3, and then it was just us." "I'm so sorry," Isabella replied, her voice dropping to a quiet sincerity that felt like a gift. Jason nodded, accepting the sympathy. "It was hard. Still is some days. But Anna's the reason I keep going. I tell her stories because, well, that's how we hold on to hope, right? That's how we create a reality that's a little bit kinder." They paused near a frozen pond where the last skaters were gliding, the air sharp and cold. Anna, momentarily distracted, pointed at a girl's glittery scarf and then spun around gracefully, twirling in her puffy coat like an impromptu ballerina. "She really believes in your story," Isabella observed, watching the child. Jason nodded, his gaze filled with a quiet, paternal pride that was deeply attractive. "She believes in a lot of things. I just wanted to give her someone to look up to, someone kind, someone gentle, someone better than the world sometimes is." Isabella felt an unexpected tightness in her throat at the profound weight of his admission. "That's a lot of faith to put in a bedtime story," she whispered. "Maybe," Jason conceded, meeting her eyes with a sincerity that brooked no argument. "But kids can tell the truth better than most adults. She saw something in you I haven't seen in years." "Hope." Isabella looked down at the snowy path crunching beneath her boots. The small, sharp sound, a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. All her life she had been relentlessly chasing perfection, guarding herself against disappointment, internalizing the belief that love was always transactional and conditional, something earned through expensive dinners, polished appearances, and tidy, predictable endings. Yet here stood a man who built honest furniture with his rough hands, a man who spun beautiful, fragile bedtime stories, not for the sake of empty romance, but for the survival of his daughter's spirit. And that daughter was now gazing at her as if she had truly stepped out of a dream. Isabella lifted her gaze, looking at Jason again, her voice soft with emergent curiosity. "Why do you think she thought I was the one?" Jason's gaze met hers, steady and clear, in the deepening twilight. "Because I told her the woman in the story would have hair like sunshine and a heart that shines even brighter than her hair. And the moment Anna saw you, she just knew." They walked on in a new, contemplative silence, the night air growing noticeably colder, but Isabella felt an incredible warmth radiating from her core, a feeling she hadn't experienced in months, perhaps years. She used to harbor the cynical belief that love was an elaborate, beautiful lie, a narrative designed to sell perfume and diamonds. Now, standing beside a carpenter and his daughter who believed implicitly in magic, she wasn't so sure anymore. The following Saturday, an unusual tremor of nervousness, coupled with pure excitement, vibrated through Isabella as she approached Jason's world. She drove out of the pristine urban bubble and located his small workshop, a utilitarian building tucked away behind an old, weathered barn. The scene utterly dominated by stacks of reclaimed wood and the earthy, comforting scent of pine and sawdust. In her hand, she held a simple brown paper bag containing lunch, and a hesitant, hopeful smile was carefully positioned on her face. Through the open door, she observed a perfect picture of quiet domesticity. Jason, his back slightly bent over a work table, deeply absorbed in the task of chiseling the precise edge of a chair leg, while Anna sat happily cross-legged nearby on a small wooden stool, her tongue poked slightly out in concentration as she colored a page with large, careful strokes. And then the Sunshine Lady brought soup to the tired king. Jason was narrating, his voice soft, animated, and clearly part of a practiced ritual. Anna gasped dramatically. "And did the king smile?" Jason chuckled, the sound a rich, warm rumble. He said it was the best soup he'd ever had. At the subtle crunch of Isabella's boots on the gravel, Anna's head snapped up. She squealed with pure, unadulterated joy, dropping her crayon and scrambling off the stool. "You came back just like in the story," she shouted, launching herself toward the newcomer. Isabella, caught entirely off guard, instinctively crouched down, opening her arms just in time to receive the full force of the child's happy embrace. She laughed, a genuine, unfettered sound that surprised even herself, marveling at how good the spontaneous hug felt. "I brought lunch," she announced, lifting the brown bag like an offering. Jason straightened up, wiping his hands on a nearby towel, his relief and pleasure evident in the way his eyes lit up. "You didn't have to," he murmured, but the accompanying smile suggested he was deeply glad she had. "I wanted to," she replied simply, the sincerity in the 4 words speaking volumes. They settled onto a worn wooden bench just outside the workshop, basking in the weak, pale winter sun, sharing sandwiches and passing a thermos of warm, spiced cider. Jason's cooking was undeniably simple. The bread slightly over-toasted, the soup maybe a touch too salty, but every bite, she realized, felt infused with sincerity and care. Conversation flowed more easily now. Stripped of the pressure of the initial date, Isabella found herself sharing stories she rarely recounted. Tales of her childhood in a house with too many rigid rules and not enough genuine warmth. "My mother expected perfection at all times. She still does," she confided, as Isabella took the well-worn book, accepting the simple ritual of the request. A quiet, profound change settled over the small living space, a shift far more significant than any strategy meeting or fashion trend had ever brought about. Anna curled up instantly in her lap, the comforting weight of the child, a physical anchor, a tiny thumb finding its way to her mouth, the fluttering of her eyelids slowing until she was lost to sleep, her breathing evening out into a soft, steady rhythm against Isabella's chest. Jason returned to the doorway, leaning against the frame of the entrance to his workshop, his gaze fixed on the two of them, watching silently, yet with an intense, quiet concentration that spoke volumes. Isabella looked down at the peaceful, trusting face of the girl, then up at the man who had built this simple, resilient little life with nothing more than love, sawdust, and whispered bedtime stories. And in that suspended moment, the relentless noise of the external world, the pressures of her career, the crushing expectations, the frantic deadlines all abruptly faded away, dissolving into the gentle, warm light of the room. She was entirely free of the typical torrent of her thoughts. She did not consider emails or strategy meetings or quarterly sales reports. Instead, her entire consciousness was focused on the simple, undeniable reality of the present, the feather-light pressure of Anna's hand resting on her arm, the sincere, unpolished way Jason's eyes crinkled when he truly smiled, and the startling realization of how this small, imperfect world made her feel more fundamentally herself than anything her world of luxury and polish had managed to achieve in years. A warm, vital emotion, a blooming sense of belonging, swelled in her chest, an emotion she was still too cautious to name. But its message was undeniable. She could not, want to leave this place. The Harris estate was the antithesis of Jason's workshop, a monument to old money and stringent control. A world Isabella had both been raised within and now felt overwhelmingly weary of. The crystal chandeliers shimmered with cold light, the air was filled with the soft, impersonal sound of string music, and champagne flutes were constantly topped up as conversations revolved around a polite, predictable cycle of acquisitions and social climbing. Jason stood tall and slightly out of place in his best shirt, which, despite his efforts, retained a subtle wrinkle from the drive, a minor imperfection magnified by the setting's flawless execution. Anna, clutching his hand tightly, was a vibrant splash of pink against the muted grandeur, her dress fluttering as they ascended the imposing marble steps. Isabella met them at the massive front door, offering a nervous, conspiratorial smile, and, in a brief, possessive gesture, quickly adjusted Jason's slightly crooked collar. "Just be yourself," she whispered urgently, her fingers lingering a moment too long. "That's all I need you to be." Inside, the atmosphere tightened instantly. Heads turned with polite curiosity and subtle judgment. Margaret Harris, Isabella's mother, a woman of steely poise dressed in an uncompromising navy silk, was strategically positioned near the fireplace, her expression utterly unreadable. As she observed her daughter escorting the carpenter and his daughter into the drawing room, Margaret offered a single, perfectly measured, dismissive nod, nothing more. Dinner was served in a room dominated by a crystal chandelier, the size of a small vehicle, its light cruelly illuminating every thread and seam. Jason, clearly attempting to follow the strict, silent rules of this world, struggled valiantly with the right fork, maintaining a stiffly straight back, while Anna sat happily beside Isabella, swinging her feet beneath the table and diligently coloring a page, blissfully unaware of the financial, social pressure cooker surrounding them, as the adults discussed stocks, obscure charities, and European villas. Then, the inevitable happened, delivered by a distant cousin with a cooing, patronizing tone. "So Anna, what prestigious prep school do you go to?" Jason cleared his throat, the sound a small, rough noise of confession. "She's not in a private school. I can't afford the tuition." A sudden, sharp silence fell over the entire table, wine glasses momentarily frozen in midair, the sound of the string music suddenly too loud. Margaret broke the hush, her voice smooth as ice and just as cold. "Not everyone is meant to reach the same heights. Some dreams belong to other skies, other realities." Isabella froze, a painful cramp constricting her chest. Jason's hand, resting beside his plate, tensed into a rigid fist, though no one else at the table seemed to register the slight, preoccupied as they were with their own self-importance. A deep, irreparable fracture had opened wide beneath the polished surface of the dinner. The conversation resumed, quickly rolling over the awkward moment with talk of art auctions and rebounding stock markets. But the damage was done. After the strained formality of dessert, Jason leaned toward Isabella, his voice low and decisive. "We should go. It's getting late." "But you just got here," she whispered, a rush of uncontrolled panic rising in her throat. He stood gently, deliberately, lifting Anna into his arms, his manner signaling a finality that chilled her. "Thank you for the evening," he announced to the room. A polite, emotionless dismissal. Margaret offered a tight, glacial smile, not even bothering to rise. Isabella scrambled after them, following them into the opulence of the coat room. "Jason, wait, please," she pleaded, reaching out. He turned, his jaw tight, his eyes shadowed with hurt and quiet anger. "I told you my family could be difficult," she insisted, desperately reaching for his arm. "You did," he said softly, shaking his head. "But I thought maybe it wouldn't matter. I thought maybe this was our story now, stronger than the noise." Anna looked up from the safe harbor of his shoulder, her brow furrowed with confusion. "Is Mommy Princess okay?" Jason's voice cracked audibly as he answered his daughter. The vulnerability, a raw wound. "She is, sweetheart. She's just living in a different castle right now." He turned back to Isabella, his gaze unwavering, a profound sadness etched on his face. "Anna thinks you're the princess from my bedtime stories, the one who brings light into our home. But I won't let her watch you get dimmed by people who don't think we're enough. I won't let her see you torn between your reality and ours." Isabella's chest tightened, the truth of his words a brutal blow. "Jason, He shook his head gently, preempting her "You don't need to choose, Isabella. I already did. I choose her, always." And with that final, resolute statement, he turned and walked away into the snowy, unforgiving night, leaving Isabella standing alone under the ornate, towering archway, the soft, superficial sounds of the party drifting through the closing door behind her. Her mother materialized from the shadows, a glass of wine held loosely in her hand. "That was dramatic," Margaret commented, taking a slow sip. Isabella's eyes welled with hot, angry tears, which she fiercely blinked away. "You did not have to humiliate him. I simply stated the truth," Margaret countered, her voice devoid of inflection. "That world is not yours, nor is it hers. You belong here. He is a child, and he is a good man, perhaps, but ultimately irrelevant to your life's trajectory." Margaret sighed, a small sound of weary superiority. "Isabella, love is not enough. Not in the real world." Isabella finally turned to face her mother fully, her own resolve hardening. "Maybe not your world," she replied, the whispered words holding the weight of a lifetime of suppressed rebellion. She walked back into the house, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble, the tightness in her throat now a painful, relentless knot of regret. For the first time in years, Isabella felt the crushing weight of her choices pressing from all sides. Duty to her powerful family, paralyzing fear of losing their approval, and the painful, undeniable realization that she had already lost something far more important than any social standing or inherited wealth. 2 weeks passed in a heavy, echoing silence. Isabella rigorously attempted to convince herself that the decision was for the best, that she had, in fact, done the right adult thing by letting him walk away. But every night, as she curled up alone in her cold, impersonal apartment, surrounded by untouched takeout and half-read fashion manuscripts, she found herself unable to silence the relentless echo of Anna's crayon drawing or the way. Jason's voice had cracked with protective finality when he declared, "I choose her always." She had prepared herself for Jason's anger, perhaps even his profound hurt, but she was entirely unprepared for what came next. One snowy afternoon, Margaret Harris arrived home unusually early. Her chauffeur was conspicuously absent. The click of her heels down the long hallway was sharp, but her expression, when she finally appeared, was curiously unreadable, until she stepped into the bright kitchen and set down her leather gloves with a quiet, genuine sigh. Isabella looked up from her tea, sensing the shift. "Is everything all right?" Margaret poured herself a glass of water, the action oddly hesitant. "My car broke down," she stated simply. Isabella raised a surprised eyebrow. "You were driving." "No," Margaret replied dryly. "The driver canceled. Something about the flu. I had errands and decided to manage on my own. A poor decision, in retrospect." "What happened?" Isabella pressed. "The engine smoked, somewhere near the outskirts. That older neighborhood," Margaret recounted, her voice oddly subdued. Isabella's chest instinctively tightened, an immediate, irrational fear. Margaret's unexpected, subdued acknowledgement of the encounter near the outskirts of town, where Jason had quietly performed an act of pure, selfless kindness by fixing her luxurious, broken-down car, was delivered with a strange, hesitant tenderness, her voice barely a whisper, as she confirmed the central fact. Anna, the little girl, had thanked her for taking care of her daddy's sunshine, a phrase that cut through the sterile atmosphere of the Harris kitchen with the clarity of a bell. Forcing Margaret to confront the profound truth of the connection she had tried to sever, Margaret simply nodded, the memory settling over her like the fresh snow outside. Then admitted, "She reminded me of you when you were that age." unafraid to love out loud. A heavy silence followed, thick with the weight of decades of unspoken maternal expectation and misunderstanding. That evening, Isabella wandered her apartment with a restless, internal agitation, her feet tracing familiar, lonely paths across the polished floor. Her gaze fell on the sketch pad she had hastily tucked away after the catastrophic dinner. She retrieved it, compelled to revisit the simple, powerful image Anna had drawn. 3 distinct stick figures, one tall man with brown hair, one golden-haired woman in a flowing dress, and the girl in pink, confidently holding both their hands. In the corner, written in careful, slightly wobbly letters, were the undeniable words, "My happy ever after." Isabella clutched the paper to her chest, the raw, beautiful hope of the drawing a stark contrast to the cold, calculating reality she had nearly chosen. That night, the snow fell thick and relentless, transforming the world into a muffled, quiet landscape, and Isabella, driven by an urgent clarity, found herself standing before Jason's workshop, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She hesitated for only a second before her trembling knuckles connected with the door. Jason opened it, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, sawdust still clinging lightly to his hair, looking exactly like the grounded, authentic man she had met. Yet something in his eyes was quieter now, shadowed by 2 weeks of self. Isabella looked up, snow melting on her coat, and stated the plain truth that had finally set her free. "I was wrong. I thought I had to choose between the life I knew and the love I felt. But I do not want to live half a life." "Jason?" His expression remained carefully unreadable as she pressed on. "I want both. You, Anna, my family, a new kind of family, one we make, not one that's given to us." Behind him, a small familiar figure peeked around the corner. Anna's eyes lit up with incandescent joy as she whispered, "Mommy, princess?" Jason turned slightly, a soft, relieved breath escaping his lips. And when he looked back at Isabella, the careful guard in his eyes finally eased. "I don't need an apology," he said quietly, his voice deep with emotion. "I just need to know you're here. Not for Anna, not for me, but for what we believe is worth fighting for our reality." "I am," she whispered back, the single word, a sacred vow. He stepped forward instantly, pulling her into his arms, holding her tightly against the cold, against the crushing weight of external doubt, against the long, isolating silence of the past 2 weeks. Anna immediately ran up and enveloped their legs in a fierce, dual hug. "Can we read the story again? The one where the princess comes back?" Jason smiled, his face radiant with a future no longer deferred. "We'll write a new one tonight, sweetheart." And this time, Isabella stayed, anchoring herself firmly in their small, imperfect world. One sunny Saturday, the children's art gallery was buzzing with warm laughter and the brilliant, uninhibited colors of childhood imagination. The handmade drawings lining the walls, a testament to tiny hands and big hearts. Isabella, elegant in a soft cream coat, her golden hair neatly tucked, felt a surge of familiar nervousness, glancing repeatedly toward the entrance. Jason was currently helping Anna rehearse a poem behind a makeshift curtain for the 5th time, the little girl gripping her paper tightly, her pink curls bouncing with pure, focused excitement. Then, the inevitable sound, the door creaked open, and Margaret Harris stepped in, dressed in her signature, meticulously tailored navy coat, pearl earrings glinting sharply under the soft gallery lights. She was every bit the high society figure, yet her step was slower, more thoughtful, less rigid. Isabella approached her with a tentative, hopeful smile. "Thank you for coming." Margaret offered a short, curt nod, her old habits dying hard. "Let us see what your little girl has prepared," she commanded. "My little girl?" Isabella echoed, her voice trembling slightly as she embraced the term, realizing she had claimed it as her own. When the MC called Anna's name, Jason gently lifted her onto the small stage. She stood at the microphone, clutching her poem with both hands, her cheeks flushed with nervousness, yet her voice rang out with surprising clarity and unshakable conviction. "My daddy tells the best stories about sawdust and stars and trees, but the best story he told me was about someone just like me. A lady with golden hair, kind eyes, and a smile so wide. She came into our home and never once tried to hide. I did not know what a mommy felt like until I met her, and everything turned bright. Now I have 2 hands to hold, a heart that feels warm when the world is cold. I found a mommy in the lady with the golden hair, and that is the story I love to share." The room erupted in soft, appreciative applause. Jason's eyes were shimmering with tears, and Isabella quickly wiped one away before it could fall. Margaret remained silent for a long moment, then, with a slow, deliberate movement, stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor as she made her way directly to the stage. She placed one elegant hand on the little girl's shoulder, and speaking not to the appreciative crowd, but directly to the child, she delivered the impossible verdict: "My granddaughter has talent." Jason blinked, stunned. Isabella's mouth parted in pure surprise. Anna simply beamed like the sun itself. Later that evening, the 3 of them, now 4, were gathered around the modest wooden table in Jason's small, cozy house. The air was rich with the comforting, unpretentious aroma of roasted chicken and fresh-baked bread. Jason had thoroughly cleaned the house in anticipation. though Isabella had already told him 1,000 times that such effort was unnecessary. Margaret had surprisingly accepted the dinner invitation, sitting now at the head of the table, her posture still perfect, but the coldness noticeably absent. She took a reserved bite of the food and delivered her highest compliment. "The potatoes are surprisingly pleasant." Jason exchanged a quick, suppressed look of amusement with Isabella, who nearly choked with silent laughter behind her napkin. Anna reached across the table, completely uninhibited, to offer Margaret a second helping of bread. After the meal, Margaret reached into her sleek handbag, her movements suddenly meaningful. "I kept something," she announced, her voice slightly strained. "From a time when I believed little girls should be made of silence and symmetry." She held out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing a delicate, slightly tarnished silver hair clip shaped like a tiny butterfly. "This belonged to your mommy when she was just your age," Margaret said, turning to Anna, "and I think it will look perfect on you." Anna gasped, utterly delighted, and threw her arms around Margaret, who, despite her evident discomfort, awkwardly patted her back and did not pull away. Jason looked across the table at Isabella, and in that shared gaze, no words were necessary. In that humble room, with the scent of leftover chicken, the glitter-covered school drawings proudly displayed on the wall, and a little girl in pink spinning around with a silver clip newly nestled in her curls, a circle was finally completed, a family bound not by blood, but by choice, by difficult effort, and by an unconditional, healing love. 1 year later, their life had undergone a beautiful transformation, driven not by grand sweeping gestures, but by the accumulation of quiet, steady, devoted love. In a small lakeside town, a cozy shop now opened its doors each morning. The Story Nook and Cafe nestled perfectly between a flower shop and a used bookstore. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee mingled harmoniously with aged paper and the familiar, comforting aroma of sawdust. Jason had built all the shelves himself, meticulously crafting polished wood and rounded edges. Isabella had designed the reading corners, each nook filled with soft cushions and gentle lighting. Together, they had created something profoundly warm and lasting, a physical manifestation of their new life. Jason worked quietly in the back, crafting intricate wooden decorations and handmade toys. Isabella ran story time for the local children, often sitting cross-legged with Anna in her lap, reading aloud from well-loved fairy tales. Anna, now happily in 1st grade, still wore a pink dress every Monday. "It brings luck," she told anyone who asked, and had become known throughout the town as the sunshine of the town, her golden curls, boundless energy, and innate kindness leaving a visible trail of warmth wherever she went. At home, the sound of laughter echoed easily in the kitchen as Jason attempted new recipes and inevitably burned half of them, while Isabella tended to herbs planted on the windowsill. Their life was simple, but never for a moment dull. Margaret called every week, her video calls less stiff now, more genuinely curious. She sent a steady supply of carefully chosen books for Anna, collections from her own childhood. During the calls, she would quiz Anna on